Very good morning, you're listening to We Radio, and it's now time to introduce my special guest here on We Radio, and I'd like to say good morning to Chris. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Lee.
How are you today, you all right?
Yes, fine, thanks very much.
Very good. So Chris is a retired police officer turned author, and we're going to find out a little bit more about his life, also, and why he got into books, and also something about this Scooby-Doo legacy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But first of all, Chris, just tell us a little bit about your career and how you got involved, sort of what jobs you've been doing.
Right, well, basically I left school and I had a job at Sandringham Gardens, Kitchen Gardens, in 1964 to 1966. A friend of mine said, why don't you join the police force? I'd never considered it as a career. I joined and spent 28 and a half years doing it. When I joined, it was the advent of the unit beat policing just coming in to take over the village beats, and it was the Pandicar area. And at the same time, the collator system, which was an intelligence system, was formed. I and West Norfolk actually originated that system, which was a paper card index system of criminal names in the vehicles they used and their associates. I spent 20 years as a deputy collator for that, and then eventually in 1988 I became the local intelligence officer. So that was always really my bent in the job, but I had diverse roles in uniform, included royalty protection at Sandringham, which was from 1969 to 1981. In those days, we just had a piece of wood down the trouser leg, not like the sophisticated things they have today with infrared alarms and submachine guns.
Yeah.
It was basically eyes and ears, and quite a different era altogether. Also, I did several major incident rooms where I was the indexer and researcher. So when I retired, that was basically still in my blood.
Yeah.
I came out with post-traumatic stress disorder, and for a time I didn't really have any connection at all with the police. My second wife, Jean, who's listening this morning, she told me of an incident that occurred to her when she was a teenager, a near abduction in the village in Cambridgeshire where she lived, and it was quite obvious to me that Robert Black, the serial child killer, was the person responsible. And that actually led me into true crime writing.
Ah, right, which we're going to come on to in just a few minutes. So during your time with the police, whereabouts were you based for the majority of the time?
Predominantly in Kingsley in West Norfolk. I was also a control operative for many years as well. We covered the area of the Wash across to a line of wells next to the sea, down to Downham Market and the Suffolk, Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire borders. So quite a large area, albeit rural.
Yeah. And so how did you end up coming here into Bishop Auckland to the northeast?
Jean's mum came from Gateshead, and we came up on holiday in 2004 and basically fell in love with the area. And we originally settled in Tony Blair's constituency at Tremdon Station, and then in 2006 we moved across to Crook, where we live now.
So you're here today because our reporter, Chris Percival, just tell us a little bit about how you first met Chris.
Through SOSAD, which is supporters of stray and abandoned dogs at DNS Kennels at Langley Moor, Chris being the photographer. Jean and I, we actually joined SOSAD after Maureen and Richard, who some of the organisers. Jean actually went to Coronation Street, the set, and thereafter we sort of were introduced to SOSAD. We've been involved in the fundraising from the outset from when we joined. Currently they have a raffle which is being drawn early October. Due to Jean's predicament that she's currently bedridden, we had 2 Cliff Richard tickets for the Sage.
Oh, excellent.
And for the 16th of October, which we donated to SOSAD to use in the raffle. So if anyone's interested in 2 Cliff Richard tickets, well worth sort of investing a couple of pounds towards
And how do people get the tickets? Do they contact SOSAD direct?
Through Simon Donnelly, supporters of stray and abandoned dogs, or through Christine.
Excellent. Right. Thanks very much for that, Chris. So coming up in, we'll just take a break now and we'll come back in just a few minutes and we'll chat a little bit more about how you got into writing crime thrillers. So we'll chat more with Chris in just a couple of minutes. And And it's now time to speak to my special guest once again, to Chris Clark, a retired police officer, and he's turned author. So just before that, you were hearing all about Chris's life as a police officer, most parts of the country, and now he's got into writing books. So Chris, what made you change from going from a police officer at retirement into writing books?
As I mentioned briefly before, Jean actually had a narrow escape from Robert Black, the serial killer, back in 1971. Having told me of the event, I then researched the early timeline of Robert Black when he moved to London, and as a result of that, in 2017, I had a book, The Face of Evil, co-authored with Robert Giles, published about Robert Black and the other crimes we suspect him of. Having exhausted the research for that, I then looked at the murders in the 1970s of unaccompanied women and formed a conclusion that one man was responsible, and that man was Peter Sutcliffe. So I wrote a book called Yorkshire Ripper, The Secret Murders, which was actually the first book before The Face of Evil. So armed with those two books, I then delved into my late father's Royal Air Force career and wrote a biography called From Hitler's U-Boats to Khrushchev's Spy Flights, because Dad covered the World War II and the Cold War. As a spin-off from that, I also wrote another book which was about the Desert Air Force in North Africa, which Dad was part of. And then I came back into true crime, and in June I had published with my co-author Adam Lloyd the Gone Fishing, which is the book about the unsolved murders of Angus Sinclair, Scotland's worst serial killer, who died without disclosing other murders. And then moving on to my current book, which was co-authored with Bethan Brown, who lives in Swindon, was the book about Christopher Halliwell, the Swindon taxi driver who murdered two women from Swindon and is suspected of being a serial killer. It's called The New Millennium Serial Killer, and it covers crimes predominantly in the northeast, the northwest, the Midlands, the southwest, and one case in London.
So a lot of these books that you've written based on true stories, isn't it really, that what you're saying? So you've done obviously a lot of the research, you've got the knowledge, and then how do you transfer that into a book as such? Is that just with help, support, or do you get guidance, or does it come naturally to yourself?
Well, basically, I'm a researcher from my police career, so I basically find out who done it and how they did it, and then I find someone who has expertise in writing a story. Thus, all of my books on true crime have been co-authored with someone I've selected who's a good writer and can tell a good story.
So we'll come back in just a few minutes and talk a little bit more in depth about your current book that you've got available now, and then we're going to touch on a little bit of something different as well. We're going to find out more about the Scooby-Doo legacy, so we'll come back to that. So we've got Chris Clark in the studio here on Weir Radio, and we'll be back with Chris in just a couple of minutes. Weir Radio, very good morning, and our special guest in the studio today is Chris Clark, and you've just been listening to Chris tell you all about some of his crime novels that he's written over the years, and he's just briefly touched on his latest book in the series, and the one called The New Millennium Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Christopher Halliwell. So Chris, tell us a little bit more about your latest book.
The book was, I started researching really after the first trial in 2012, where Halliwell was convicted of the murder of Sian O'Callaghan in Swindon. He was also charged with the murder of Becky Godden Edwards, but the defence made play on Mr. Fulcher, who was the detective who arrested Halliwell, the fact that his evidence was inadmissible under pace. So the trial stalled with Becky. So I sort of picked up afterwards and looked at Halliwell's early life around Swindon and the West Country, and I came up with two murders in 1983 and 1984 that I felt the police should be looking at with him in mind. He was an antique thief and burglar, and he went into prison and did a part 4-year sentence. Whilst he was in Dartmoor, he asked his cellmate, "How many women do you need to murder to be a serial killer?" Which was a very strange statement for a burglar. It wasn't really picked up by anyone at all. So Halliwell remained under the radar until Sian Callahan was abducted after leaving a Swindon nightclub in March 2011. Very quickly the police got onto it, and they effected Halliwell's arrest. When he was arrested, Mr. Fulcher, Steve Fulcher, who was the officer in the case, he said, "Do you want another one?" And he actually led Mr. Fulcher on a 20-mile trail to a field in South Gloucestershire in Eastleach, actually paced out a distance into the field, and he said, "She's buried there." At the time, the police didn't know who the victim was, and it transpired it was Becky Godden Edwards. And she'd actually been mutilated, and her head and leg were missing from the scene.
That's so sad, so sad. But it's incredible that you've actually been able to do all that research, put all the pieces of the jigsaw basically together, and be able to write that story about that.
Yes, I started researching other unsolved murders of women around the United Kingdom that had the parameters of they were near waterways, because Halliwell was a freshwater fisherman. Yeah. He was also a narrowboat enthusiast, and also some of the victims crossed police boundaries. They went from one police force into another. An example of that is Vicky Glass, who was abducted from the centre of Middlesbrough in 1998 and was found on the North York Moors near Danby, about 20 miles away, very close to Scaling Dam Reservoir.
So how many books have you written altogether then, Chris?
Altogether, I've written four true crime books at the moment, 2 Royal Air Force themed books, and I've also ghost-written a book for Stephen Downing, the man wrongly accused of the Bakewell murder. But Stephen, I allowed Stephen to keep the book in his name.
So how can people get copies of the book? Is it available online, or can they go into a bookshop?
The current book, the new Millennium Serial Killer, is available via the publishers, but it's also just been launched on Amazon. And all of my previous works are currently still on Amazon.
Amazon as well. So if you search Chris Clark on Amazon, and also I believe it's on the crimepublishingnetwork.com website as well. There's lots of different books on there, but yours is on there, The New Millennium Serial Killer. And I'm just looking at the front picture, and is it set in a forest with the trees, and there's a guy just stood in the middle of...
Yes, it's sort of a Spectre in the Mist type of cover. And it sort of portrays him sort of going into a forest with a young woman and digging a hole and burying her.
Yeah, it's quite disturbing, but it's good that these books, they are available for people to read, to know exactly what goes on and how these murder crimes are solved in a way.
Yeah, the police found 60 items of women's clothing around a pond in Ramsbury in Wiltshire. One boot was belonging to Sian, and a cardigan belonging to Becky. So there are 58 pieces of women's clothing that have never been identified to a victim. Right. Additionally, Mr. Fulcher found 12 pencil sketches of landscapes that Halliwell had drawn, very similar to the Ian Brady's photographs on Saddleworth Moor, where they were trophies. And so they're somewhere around the country there are 12 deposition sites where women are buried, and they will be missing persons as opposed to unsolved murders.
Yeah. Right, well, that's great. Thank you very much. So once again, if you do want any of Chris's books, they're available on Amazon. You can search his name on Amazon, and also on the crimepublishingnetwork.com website as well. And before you go, we're going to take a bit of a break now. We're going to play the Beatles and Paperback Writer, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to ask you, what is this Scooby-Doo legacy? And we're going to find out from Chris what that's all about next.
Paperback Writer.
Classic from the Beatles and Paperback Writer here on Weir Radio. And my final part of the interview for my special guest today, retired police officer turned author Chris Clark. And at the bottom of my note I was given from Chris Percival says, away from books, the Scooby-Doo legacy. So come on, Chris, I need to know what this Scooby-Doo legacy is all about.
Scooby-Doo was a small lurcher that Jean and I rehomed from supporters of stray and abandoned dogs at Dearness Kennels. He was about 10 or 11 when we had him. It's quite clear he'd had a very miserable life. The 2 years we had him, he was wonderful. He was loving right from the beginning, trusting. Unfortunately, he developed a large tumour on his brain and another one on his jaw. So we sadly had to say goodbye to him. Because of the impact on our lives that he'd created, we decided to carry on a fund called Scooby-Doo's Legacy for So Sad and the other dogs who currently and in the future are still in the kennels waiting for their forever home.
Yeah.
So that's Scooby-Doo's Legacy.
Oh, excellent. And just remind us about those 2 tickets you've got to give away as well, which is a link to that as well.
Yes, Christine Percival, she's the photographer for So Sad, and every cat that's going to be released by the local RSPCA, she puts it up on Facebook. And it started off September last year, this little cat called Holly, who we rehomed. She was very, very shy and wasn't bonding at all. So earlier this year, in our wisdom, we decided to rehome Mavis and Purdy, 2 younger cats.
Yeah.
And so we now have 3 loving cats in the household. And again, if anyone wants to rehome a cat, just to watch the local Facebook for Christine to pop them up.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out to come into We Radio today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and to listen to some of your insights to how you've written those novels, the books of serial killers. It's incredible. So thank you very much once again for popping in. Hope you've enjoyed your time here at We Radio.
Yes, thanks very much, Lee, and thanks for inviting me on.
Wish you all the very best in the very near future as well. And if you want any of Chris's books, as I say, they're available on Amazon and also on the crimepublishingnetwork.com website as well. So once again, thanks very much, Chris. Take care, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.